in Detroit earlier this week, so I'll kind of give you an idea. Everything's above average right now as far as water levels. We expect things to be above average, and that's how things look. Do I have a clicker? Yes, I do. Excellent. So back in June of 2014, the IJC finished its work on the water levels and flows for Lake Ontario. Many of you have probably been engaged in this process for a very long time. The IJC formally recognized in 1993 that the compression of Lake Ontario levels under the current regulation plan was causing harm to wetlands and all the critters that depend on wetlands for spawning and to live. And so there have been a number of iterations throughout the years. The board tried to do what they could do, and then came with a conclusion that in order to be able to address that compression issue, we would have to open up and change the order. And so then the United States and Canada gave us over $20 million between the two of them. We had a 5-year study, which many of you were probably serving on, and came up with several candidate plans. We've done extensive public outreach over that period of time, and went back to the drawing board again based on that continued science. And in Plan 2014 is a version of the B candidate plans for those of you that are familiar with this. And what Plan 2014 has is some deviations at the very top and the very bottom, but really is a philosophical, different approach than what we currently have. Right now, Plan 1958 DD, for those of you who don't follow water level regulation plans, said that as long as the water supplies are within the supplies of the past, the board shall keep it within this 4-foot range. And so what that did is it told managers to shoot for the middle. And I'll show you some graphs so you can see how compressed those levels on Lake Ontario have been, which have been very different than the other lakes because of the regulation. And even the board doing everything they possibly can, having discretionary deviations, have still not been able to keep it within that range. So it's not an accurate thing that humans have the ability to control. Mother Nature is the senior partner, and we want to work with her, and we want to be able to still moderate those extreme levels for all of the benefits. There's multiple desires. As you know, there's no one perfect level for every critter or every person or every need, so the IJC has to take an entire watershed approach while listening to every single concern. And we want to be prepared for climate change. So the models that folks were able to create, we had 50,000 years of stochastic modeling, so we could do the most severe low water, high water, any other scenarios, and we found Plan 2014 to be the most robust. So let's kind of get into this. So just a little bit more about the International Joint Commission for those of you that might be not that familiar with us. We've been around since we were created by the Boundary Waters Treaty of 1909. We have a purview across, I like to say we have a long and narrow view between the United States and Canada. So I would probably guess about 40% of our work is within the Great Lakes, but we also do a lot of work in the St. Croix watershed all the way over to the Okanagan Basin and the Soyuz Lake. So just to kind of give you a little perspective there. So these are the key findings. I just wanted to cut right to the chase here. We know that 1958 DD has damaged the upper river and the Lake Ontario coastal system, that we've compressed those water levels, they've degraded our coastal wetlands, and that we can't change this unless we change the regulation plan. It's just a fact. So we believe that Plan 2014 mitigates much of the harm. It doesn't bring us back to natural flows. There's a lot of compromise. There's a lot of other existing uses and interests. All of these things we think we balance, but we believe we are able, the Plan 2014 does that hydrological fix that we need in order to nourish the wetlands and dry out the wetlands at the key times to keep them as productive as possible. Plan 2014 respects the order of precedent in the Boundary Waters Treaty. For those of you who don't read the Boundary Waters Treaty every day, it's really an amazing treaty, and I won't kind of get too excited about it, but it really is. It's like the first peace treaty. Nothing like this would probably be adopted today. But it really was one of the first international treaties that recognized that neither the United States or Canada was going to pollute to adversely impact the property or health of those on the other side. So it's really the foundation for having such an amazing relationship between the United States and Canada. And so in the order of precedence, first is drinking water and sanitation, domestic uses, and then we have to consider navigation, and then hydropower and agriculture, and then the treaty continues, and we have to consider all other interests. And things have changed since 1909. There were some, I won't get into too much interesting issues, but over in Shoal Lake, if any of you in Ontario are familiar with some of those issues, in Shoal Lake in the watershed, the IJC in 1914 did not really adequately consult or consider the interests of the native people at that point in time. And in the 1950s, we did not adequately consider, or even consider at all, the impact on the environment. This is before NEPA. This is before, actually this is when we think DDT is good for us and lead paint is wonderful. So things have changed and evolved. So we respect the order of precedence while considering all other uses. And Plan 2014 in our mind is the best. And we were unanimous and forwarded over to the government for their consideration. So this would, you can't talk about the plan without my favorite spaghetti graph. So every single one of those years and those colors that you see up there, that's one water year in Lake Ontario. And this is what it would look like under Plan 2014 as modeled. And so to compare that, you can see what it would look like unregulated if water was just able to do what it wanted to do through the St. Lawrence River, and then you can see how compressed those water levels are under the current plan. And so what Plan 2014 does is it still is able to manage those highs and those lows, but allows it to be more relaxed in the middle, which is so critical for that coastal ecosystem. And this is what we're talking about with that 4-foot range. That's the two lines that you see there, and then where the exceedances are. And so there's about a difference between 3 feet between the 95 percentile, which is at the lowest level, and then 2% at the top. So this is what you guys most, and you're probably very familiar with these, but let's talk about fish. I know y'all care about fish. So one of our indicators, our performance indicators, are northern pike. Northern pike, as you know, need to spawn in the floodplain in the flooded meadow marsh. That's so critical. So this is your wetland index. The black lines are the existing plans. So that's 1958 DD. Plan BV7 is what we came out with. Did a round of public hearings, heard that folks wanted a little bit more protection on the highs and the lows, and then we tweaked around with a few things and saw that if we did set triggers at key levels, then we would still allow the lake to do what it needed to do in the middle and be able to act to reduce the more extreme. So you see we lose just a little bit. Plan BV7 was slightly better, but we think that little loss is okay to make more people happy, knowing that we will never make everybody happy with water level regulation. That is not an objective that's achievable. The northern pike, and then as you can see, once you get in the lower St. Lawrence River, it hasn't really been impacted. The river's flows from the Ontario River, from wind events, have much more of an impact than regulation. Regulation really impacts the upper lake, the upper river, and the lake itself. And so these were kind of our key. There's many indicators that we have, but this is really kind of when we boil it down to the key performance indicators of what we're looking at. Comparing plans to plans, these are the ones that we ended up using and we continue to use. So we see significant benefits, and it's pretty much about the same for Northern Pike with Plan 2014 as Plan BV7, and significantly greater than the existing plan. And then this is a coastal property is a significant concern that we've paid very very, very close attention to. And I think it's really important that you take a look at these bars. And you may have a hard time seeing the bars, but they're there. The differences are very small. But you can see unregulated red is how much things would cost if we didn't do any regulation at all. Black is the existing plan, and then Plan 2014. So you can see there's a little bit of difference under Lake Ontario Shore Protection Maintenance. This is the frequency in which individuals would have to repair, maintain, upgrade, replace the hardened shore structures on the shoreline. So we aren't talking about houses or anything else. There's the same level of risk for houses being flooded in the first floor under any plan. That's just a risk of living in a coastal environment. And you can see under erosion to an unprotected development property, there's very little change. Lake Ontario flooding, there you can barely see there's even a change at all. And the lower St. Lawrence River, there's a very little change. So the biggest change is between the maintaining and upgrading the hardened shore protection. So what I want to move on, we have a number of key elements. So Plan 2014 is a shorthand for a number of things. One would be a new order. One is a new regulation plan. So the order is the framework in which the IJC is able to operate. The regulation plan are the rules in which the board on a day-to-day basis manages the water levels and what the flows are. We also see there's significant need for us to really do adaptive management, and I'm sure adaptive management's been a discussion with the Great Lakes Fisheries Commission as well. And so I want to share with you just a little bit about where we're coming from on this. So the IJC has been asked by the United States and Canadian governments on average, every 30 years to do significant studies on the physical systems of the Great Lakes. In the 60s, in the 80s, whenever there's a high event, whenever there's a low event, folks get concerned, they give us a bunch of money. We do a lot of really important work, and then it sits on a shelf somewhere, and we don't want to do that anymore. As a steward of public resources, I do not think that is the right way to do it. We know that we're going to continue to have challenges, especially under climate change, whether it's wetter or it's drier or it's more intense. And so both out of the Lower Lakes study and the Upper Great Lakes study, adaptive management was a recommendation for us to move forward on. And it's really taking all of this information that we've been able to collect, all of the mines that we've been working with, and keeping it alive. Some of the small projects that we have going on, just as simple as making sure that we're having our programs in current computer languages and on servers that will continue to operate into the future, where maybe not a lot of people are learning Fortran right now, but we want to make sure that that we're able to bring this on to the next generation. So those are kind of the simple things, but it's really good stewardship of data and information, and also recognizing that I think the days of large studies, here's 5 years, do a discrete thing, move forward. That's not the way that we're going to be working. We know that the systems are going to continue to change. We know there's no shortage of variables, and we know that we need to follow that iterative process of planning, of doing, of learning, adapting, and then starting that process over again. So one of the key things, so what we did is the IJC established our Great Lakes Adaptive Management Committee. It reports up through our Board of Control for the Great Lakes, and so I think there's a lot of opportunities for us to work with the Great Lakes Commission in the future as we look at our performance indicators, assessing especially sturgeon spawning in the St. Mary's River, in the Upper Lakes and Northern Pike, and other fish diversity issues in the lower lakes. So I just wanted to flag that for you, plant that seed, and we really look forward to working closer with the Fisheries Commission on adaptive management as it comes to the control that the humans have over water levels in the Great Lakes and what we don't have control over. So Plan 2014, we expect it's going to moderate extreme highs and lows that will provide those economic benefits to the regions, hydropower, shipping, water supply, flood control. We think it may, So what's really tough about shoreline protection structures is this does not happen on a average. It's not like, hey, I can just put in, a couple $100 here. You're talking about $1,000 in an episodic event. So, which is very challenging. And if the structure gets overtopped, and it either stays or it doesn't. So we do think that by increasing the cost, it's mostly increasing the frequency, which also increases the cost. But we think that you'd have to replace your structure sooner rather than later. So, but again, that's up to major precipitation and wind events, which are completely outside of our control. And we retain the protection and benefits downstream in Quebec. As to what they are now. There is, we think shipping pretty much stays the same. Things actually might be a little bit better for commercial navigation on the river. There are some rare low water years that we saw in the stochastic modeling that would happen on average about 1 or 2 times a century, where ships would have to light load that are transiting only across Lake Ontario. And we think that that's something that's doable, and that's how you get the so that's the environmental benefit, and that's the question before the United States and Canadian federal governments right now. And we'll get to what that core question is evaluating what the environment needs. Let's see here. And then, so what we're talking about 26,000 hectares or 64,000 acres of coastal wetlands. That's the size of Buffalo and Rochester together, just to think about that. So those wetlands exist now, they just aren't highly productive. So we aren't talking about actually, creating new ones. We're talking about fixing that basic hydrology to feed and make those wetlands stronger and able to do what they need to do. And then also help support all of the other efforts that are going on through the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative and other restoration efforts to build and restore wetlands and actually keep those healthy too, because you need to have the right hydrology for that to happen. And then we want to be prepared for future changes. I'm most struck by the public hearings when people would come and be mad that we would think about saying that we couldn't keep it within the 4-foot range, and that they built these structures to the 4-foot range. And as try as we might over the last 50 years, we have not been able to manage the system at that level. This is the 14th largest lake in the world, and she's the senior partner. And so people need to know what the real risks are and what the design standards should be, and we need to be making decisions based on science and truth. I'm a radical. And we think it's very important to realize the issues of climate change. We know that that Plan 2014, it's been tested, it's more robust under a larger range of supply scenarios, under wetter and higher levels. We think it neutralizes those ecological impacts during drought conditions, while still continuing to moderate those highs and lows, and making sure that all of the interests are held whole. So again, we think this is the best plan to go. The question, though, before the United States and Canadian governments, and this is still under consideration, and it's still things that people are considering within the U.S. and Canadian government right now, is does the U.S. and Canada agree that the IJC should, while respecting all established uses and interests, also include the needs of the natural environment? We believe it's consistent with our two nations' laws and the current values and what's right for our stewardship of the lake. And we look forward to hearing from the United States and Canada on this. So that's, I'd happy to open it up to any other questions. I have other graphs if you're interested in looking at more spaghetti graphs of the lower river, but I mostly focused on Lake Ontario. So thank you.